Harvest your crops and pop your pimples because we have scary stories to tell in the dark. Yes, if August couldn't get any scarier with the release of Dora the Explorer, we have Guillermo Del Toro's latest screenplay. In this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into the ending and explaining some of these badass monsters along the way. So here we go. Scary Stories begins on Halloween of 1968 in the small town of Mill Valley, Pennsylvania. And it's no wonder this town is called Mill Valley, as the local paper mill is at the core of all the spooky happenings.
Spooky.
When local teenagers Stella, Augie, Ramon, and Chuck break into the abandoned Bellows place, a house known for its child murders, they uncover the secret room of Sarah Bellows. Sarah was the daughter of Deodat Bellows, the owner of the town's paper mill in the late 1800s. She was born with a rare condition of albinism, making her body pale white and causing her family to lock her in the basement away from the local townspeople. Sarah would spend her time in the basement telling stories through the wall to local children and writing them in her book with her own blood. But Sarah held a darker secret. She knew that her father's paper mill was responsible for the deaths of the townspeople. Mercury from the mill had spread into the water and poisoned many of Mill Valley's inhabitants. So when Stella and the gang take her book, it unleashes the full rage of Sarah Bellows, hell-bent on destroying anything that comes in her way. The book begins to target one kid per day, writing a story in blood which eventually comes true. The first victim is Tommy, in a story simply titled Harold, named after the beautiful scarecrow Tommy loves to beat the shit out of.
Eat it, Harold.
As Harold comes to life, he stabs Tommy with a pitchfork, eventually turning him into a scarecrow himself. Ironic that the thing Tommy hated is the thing that he becomes. And worst of all, the gang finds out that the book can't be destroyed or discarded. When Stella brings the book back to the mansion, it somehow ends up right back in her room. Or when they decide to light it on fire, it emerges completely unscathed. The second victim is Augie, whose story is called The Big Toe, a story told to him by his father when he was a kid, in which a corpse comes looking for its missing big toe, a big toe that was in the stew he ate for dinner. He's captured by a character simply known as the Toe Monster, but by the end of the film he's still missing, leaving room for a sequel. The attack on Augie spurs the gang to look into the death of Sarah Bellows. They stop at their local newspaper and dig up articles from 1898, the year Sarah apparently hung herself with her own hair. The papers reported that a servant at the Bellows Manor, Lulu Baptiste, had taught Sarah black magic, which was used to kill the townspeople. But before they can check up on Lulu, the book begins to write its next story, The Red Spot, referring to Ruth's massive pimple that puts even my worst high school zit to shame. Ruth survives this attack after dozens of spiders hatch out of her face, prompting the gang to hasten their search for answers by questioning Lulu Baptiste, the Bellows former servant who apparently had taught Sarah black magic. They find Lulu, but she's blind and seemingly suffering from some form of delirium. Nevertheless, she tells them two new pieces of key information: that Sarah was never taught black magic, and that she didn't hang herself at home as the legend said, rather at a psychiatric hospital. A psychiatric hospital Stella and Ramon later visit and find out was the location where Sarah was brutally tortured via electroshock therapy. Her family wanted her to admit that their mill had nothing to do with the deaths in town, something that would be patently false. Unfortunately, it's also at this hospital that the next story occurs, The Dream, a reference to Charlie's dream he had in the Red Room while visited by a pale lady. And that's exactly what happens. Charlie is consumed by the pale lady in a room that's not only the color red, but the RED stands for Records and Evaluation Department. The second last monster is the Jangly Man, in a story called Mitai Dodie Walker, a lyric that the monster sings in the printed version of the story. The Jangly Man is a decomposing corpse that can stitch or rip apart pieces of its body at will. Fun fact, the Jangly Man is performed by an actual contortionist by the name of Troy James, who you may have seen on America's Got Talent. The Jangly Man is after Ramon, calling him a coward. As we learn earlier in the story, Ramon is on the run because he's a draft dodger. After his brother was killed in Vietnam, he decided to live out of his car in order to avoid the draft. And that's one of the great things about these monsters. Their stories all somehow relate to the characters. For example, Ramon, whose brother was blown to pieces, is now literally chased by a creature who is in pieces. Or Ruth, a woman focused on looking her best, is scarred by a spider-infested pimple. The monsters have become reality because of the stories the characters learned as children. For example, Chuck's comes from a dream, Augie a story his dad told him, and Ramon a campfire story he was told as a child. With limited time left, Ramon distracts the Jangly Man while Stella goes after Sarah in the abandoned house. If she can tell Sarah that they know she was innocent, perhaps they can put an end to her madness. And that's exactly what happens. The final story, The Haunted House, sees Stella confront the final monster, Sarah. Stella tells her that she'll make sure Sarah's story gets out there, that the truth of her innocence and what her family did will be revealed. Sarah hands her an ink pen and makes her write the story in blood, because who doesn't like a story written in good old-fashioned blood? And with that, Sarah's soul is put to rest and the Jangly Man is destroyed along with it. Sarah has redeemed herself and learned from Stella that the rage she projected onto innocent people is no different than how her family dealt with her, even though she was innocent. The film ends with Stella saying goodbye to Ramon, who has made the decision to fight in Vietnam. His character arc was one of coward to hero. His fight with the Jangly Man has allowed him to muster the courage to fight abroad, rather than run away from the thing that scared him the most. Similarly, Stella has also changed. At the beginning of the film, she's asked by Augie if she's going to hand in her stories to the school paper, but she doesn't because she's not confident in her own writing. At the end, we see her win multiple awards for her work, and she tells us that if anything, Sarah taught her never to give up. And never giving up is where the story ends, with Stella, Ruth, and her father venturing away from Mill Valley to find a way to save Augie and Chuck, paving the way for an eventual sequel. The time period of 1968 is also very interesting because of its social commentary. 68 was a time of great change, and so too do our characters go through their own big changes. It was a time filled with monsters of its own kind, like Nixon, who tried to hide the truth about Vietnam and Watergate from the American people, just like the Bellows family tried to hide the truth about their poisonous paper mill from the community. Scary Stories, although not really bringing anything new to the genre, is a fun, well-executed horror. I want to hear your thoughts below, and make sure to like and subscribe. I got more videos on the way, and you can follow me on Twitter at ThinkStoryYT. And until next time, remember, Daddy loves you very much.